35,000 feet over Hanoi. Three waves of B-52 Stratofortresses converge on the most heavily defended airspace in history. Their bomb bays loaded with over 100 tons of ordnance per cell, while SA, two batteries below, track every radar signature, and MiG-21 interceptors scramble into the winter darkness. The North Vietnamese leadership has spent 4 years building a defensive network designed to bleed American air power into irrelevance. What follows over the next 11 nights will prove that concentrated strategic bombing, delivered with relentless tempo and adaptive tactics, can shatter even the most sophisticated integrated air defense system and create the conditions that force a negotiated end to a war that ground combat alone could not resolve. By late 1972, the Paris peace talks had collapsed into procedural deadlock. Hanoi's negotiators stalled on every clause, confident that domestic pressure would force Washington to accept terms favorable to the North. President Nixon and National Security Advisor Kissinger faced a strategic dilemma. Ground forces were withdrawing under Vietnamization, yet North Vietnam showed no willingness to compromise. The solution lay in demonstrating that the United States retained the capability and resolve to impose unacceptable costs on Hanoi's war-making infrastructure. That capability rested with Strategic Air Command's fleet of B-52 Stratofortresses, the only platform capable of delivering the tonnage and sustained bombardment required to cripple military and infrastructure sites deep inside North Vietnam's heartland. The B-52D and G models, assigned to Linebacker II, carried payloads exceeding 108,000 pounds of conventional bombs, either 84 500-pounders internally, or a mix of internal and external loads tailored to target type. Cruising at altitudes between 30,000 and 40,000 feet, the bombers relied on radar-guided bombing systems that allowed strikes through cloud cover and darkness. Each three-ship cell flew in tight formation, their jamming pods creating overlapping electronic coverage that disrupted enemy radar tracking and forced defenders to work harder for targeting solutions. The bombers, staged from Andersen Air Force Base on Guam and Utapao Royal Thai Naval Airfield in Thailand, requiring round-trip missions of up to 12 hours for Guam-based aircraft. Refueling tracks over the South China Sea and Laos became critical choke points where tankers orbited in stacked altitudes, topping off strike packages before they penetrated North Vietnamese airspace. Hanoi's integrated air defense system represented the culmination of Soviet doctrine and technology. Over 200 SA-2 guideline surface-to-air missile sites ringed the capital and the port of Haiphong, each battery capable of engaging targets at ranges up to 25 miles and altitudes up to 60,000 feet. The SA-2's radar guidance required continuous tracking, making it vulnerable to jamming. But North Vietnamese operators had learned to fire salvos in rapid succession, saturating defensive countermeasures and forcing bombers into evasive maneuvers. Anti-aircraft artillery, AAA, filled the lower altitudes with walls of fire from 37mm, 57mm, and 85mm guns, many radar-directed and linked to central fire control networks. MiG-21 interceptors added a mobile layer, vectored by ground-controlled intercept radars, to intercept points where they could launch infrared-guided atoll missiles or close for cannon attacks. The system's redundancy and layered coverage meant that suppressing one element rarely opened a safe corridor. Attackers had to penetrate all three layers simultaneously. American planners understood that a sustained campaign required more than brute force. Linebacker II's architecture integrated multiple mission types into a coordinated package. Wild Weasel crews flew suppression missions, hunting SAM sites with anti-radiation missiles that homed on radar emissions. Navy A-6 intruders and Air Force F-111 seconds struck airfields, petroleum storage, and rail yards to isolate the target area and degrade the enemy's ability to sustain defensive operations. Phantom fighters established defensive screens between MiG bases and the bomber streams, engaging interceptors before they could reach launch parameters. Jamming aircraft orbited outside the threat envelope, blinding early warning radars and disrupting communications nets. The entire package depended on precise timing. If bombers arrived before suppression flights neutralized the SAMs, losses would mount. If they arrived too late, defenses would recover. The operational constraints were severe. Weather over North Vietnam in December brought low clouds and monsoon rains, limiting visual reconnaissance and forcing reliance on radar bombing. Rules of engagement prohibited strikes within certain buffer zones near the Chinese border and restricted attacks on targets near civilian concentrations, narrowing the list of approved aim points. Each mission required approval at the highest levels, with target lists reviewed by the Joint Chiefs and the White House. Fuel margins on Guam-based missions left little room for delays or diversions. A tanker failure or weather abort could leave bombers short of fuel over hostile territory. Crew fatigue became a factor as sortie rates climbed, with some aircraft turning around for a second mission within 24 hours. The North Vietnamese, meanwhile, enjoyed interior lines. Damaged SAM sites could be repaired overnight, and mobile batteries relocated to ambush points along predicted ingress routes. Strategic Air Command had not faced a sophisticated air defense network since World War II. The B-52 was designed for high-altitude nuclear strikes against targets defended by interceptors, not for sustained conventional bombing through dense SAM belts. Doctrine emphasized formation integrity and jamming coordination, but tactics evolved slowly. Early Linebacker II missions followed predictable patterns. Bombers entered North Vietnamese airspace at the same altitudes, on similar headings, and at intervals that allowed defenders to reload and reacquire. The first 3 nights validated North Vietnamese confidence. SA-2 batteries fired over 200 missiles, downing 3 B-52 seconds on the opening night alone. Crews reported SAM launches from multiple azimuths, with missiles climbing through the jamming and detonating close enough to shred control surfaces and fuel tanks. The loss rate, approaching 2% per sortie, was unsustainable. If the pattern continued, Hanoi's defenses would outlast the bomber fleet. Crew debriefs from the 4th night describe a mission typical of the still-evolving tactics. A 3-ship cell from the 307th Strategic Wing approached Hanoi from the northwest, deviating from the previous night's southern routes. The lead aircraft, call sign Olive 1, carried a full load of 500-pound bombs targeted against the Kin No Railroad complex. At 36,000 feet, the formation flew through intermittent clouds, relying on terrain mapping radar and celestial navigation to maintain course. The electronic warfare officer monitored his radar warning scope, watching as SA-2 guidance radars swept the formation. Jamming pods on each aircraft generated overlapping noise, but the North Vietnamese had learned to burn through by narrowing beam width and increasing power. At 18 miles from the target, the first SAM launch light appeared. Olive 1's pilot held course, trusting the jamming and the chaff corridor laid 10 minutes earlier by a Phantom flight. 2 missiles climbed toward the cell, their booster plumes visible through breaks in the cloud deck. The formation's defensive doctrine prohibited evasive maneuvers until after bomb release. Breaking formation would scatter the jamming coverage and leave each aircraft vulnerable. Olive 2's crew watched the missiles track upward, their trajectories adjusting as ground controllers fed corrections. At 6 miles, 1 missile detonated prematurely, its warhead triggered by jamming-induced guidance errors. The second continued, passing within 1,000 feet of Olive 3 before losing lock and tumbling into the darkness. The cell reached the initial point, opened bomb bay doors, and released on radar cues. 84 bombs per aircraft fell in a string across the rail yard, cratering tracks and collapsing a locomotive maintenance shed. Post-strike reconnaissance would later confirm that the complex remained inoperable for 3 weeks, severing a key link in the supply line feeding forces in the south. Then the campaign shifted. Planners compressed time over target windows, sending multiple cells over Hanoi within a 15-minute span to overwhelm fire control networks. Instead of predictable racetrack patterns, bombers varied ingress headings and altitudes, forcing defenders to reposition radars and recalculate intercept geometry. Suppression flights increased in number and aggressiveness, with wild weasels loitering near known SAM sites and launching the moment a radar illuminated. Chaff corridors, clouds of radar-reflective aluminum strips, were laid ahead of the bomber streams, creating false targets and masking actual formations. Navy aircraft struck petroleum storage facilities at Haiphong, triggering fires that illuminated the night sky and drew defensive attention away from Hanoi. The North Vietnamese found themselves reacting to multiple threats simultaneously, unable to concentrate fire on any single axis. Yet the adaptation was not seamless. On the fifth night, a cell approaching from a new vector arrived, 30 seconds late to the chaff corridor. 2 SAMs broke through the jamming, and 1 bomber went down over the Red River Delta. The lesson was clear. Timing windows allowed no margin for error. The technical challenge of radar bombing through weather required precise coordination between the radar navigator and bombardier. The bomber's navigation system fused terrain mapping radar and star trackers to compute a continuous position fix. The radar navigator matched terrain features to pre-mission imagery, designated the aim point, and the system calculated release parameters. Accuracy hovered around 450 feet under ideal conditions, good enough for rail yards and fuel depots, but less effective against hardened bunkers or dispersed facilities. The North Vietnamese exploited this by positioning high-value assets near restricted zones, betting that near misses would spare critical infrastructure. Wild Weasel crews operated at the edge of the envelope. An F-105 from the 17th Wild Weasel Squadron, callsign Firebird, orbited south of Hanoi at 20,000 feet, its radar warning system scanning for SAM guidance emissions. When a site activated to engage an inbound B-52 cell, Firebird's electronic warfare officer called the bearing and range. The pilot rolled into a dive, accelerating to 550 knots, and launched an anti-radiation missile from 12 miles. The missile's seeker locked onto the radar's transmission, guiding toward the source even as the site shut down. Impact occurred 30 seconds later, the warhead detonating among the guidance vans and destroying 2 radar antennas. The site remained offline for the remainder of the night. Firebird egressed at low altitude, jinking to avoid AAA, and recovered to Korat Royal Thai Air Force Base, with fuel reserves below 1,000 pounds. The mission typified the high-risk, high-reward calculus of suppression. Each neutralized site opened a corridor, but the cost in fuel, ordnance, and exposure was steep. By the 6th night, North Vietnamese SAM inventory began to show strain. Intelligence estimated that Hanoi had expended over 800 missiles in the first 5 nights, a rate that outpaced resupply from Soviet and Chinese sources. Battery commanders grew more selective, holding fire until bombers were within optimal engagement zones and conserving missiles for high-probability shots. This shift played into American hands. With fewer missiles in the air, bombers could maintain formation discipline and concentrate jamming on the remaining threats. Suppression flights exploited the hesitation, loitering near known sites and forcing them to choose between revealing their positions or allowing bombers to pass unmolested. The calculus of attrition favored the attackers. Each night, more targets were struck, more rail lines severed, more fuel depots destroyed, while the defenders' ability to regenerate degraded incrementally. Yet the pressure was not one-sided. Maintenance crews at Anderson struggled to repair battle damage from near-miss detonations. 2 aircraft were grounded on the 7th night due to hydraulic failures that could not be fixed in time. A case study in adaptive tactics emerged on the night of December 22nd, when a coordinated strike targeted the Hanoi radio communication facility and the Yen Vien rail yard simultaneously. Planners scheduled 2 bomber waves 15 minutes apart, each approaching from opposite directions. The first wave, consisting of 9 B-52 seconds from Utapao, ingressed from the south at 33,000 feet, drawing SAM and AAA fire. Suppression flights saturated the southern SAM belt with anti-radiation missiles, forcing batteries to shut down or displace. As the first wave egressed, the second wave, 12B 52 seconds from Guam, approached from the northwest at 38,000 feet, exploiting the gap in coverage created by the southern engagement. The northern defenses, caught repositioning to counter the first wave, fired hastily and without optimal geometry. Both targets sustained heavy damage, with post-strike imagery showing collapsed buildings at the communication facility and over 40 railcars destroyed at Yen Vien. The double-axis attack demonstrated that flexible tactics and compressed timing could fracture even a well-integrated defense, forcing adversaries to divide attention and dilute firepower across multiple threats. What this proved was that North Vietnam's system, however sophisticated, could not adapt faster than the tempo of American operations. Maintenance crews at Anderson and Utapao worked around the clock to sustain sortie rates. Each returning bomber required post-flight inspection, refueling, ordnance loading, and systems checks before the next mission. Battle damage from near-miss SAM detonations often included shrapnel punctures in control surfaces, hydraulic leaks, and damaged avionics. Crew chiefs prioritized repairs that restored mission capability, deferring non-critical fixes. Ordnance teams loaded bombs in pre-configured pallets, reducing turnaround time to under 6 hours for some aircraft. Fuel trucks shuttled between the flight line and storage tanks, topping off internal and external tanks. The logistics chain stretched back to depots in the continental United States, where bombs, spare parts, and electronic components were airlifted to the theater on C-141 and C-5 transports. Any break in the chain, a delayed parts shipment, a maintenance error, a fuel shortage, rippled forward, grounding aircraft and reducing the weight of the next night's strike. MiG interceptors posed a persistent but manageable threat. North Vietnamese pilots favored hit-and-run tactics, diving from high altitude to launch atoll missiles at bomber formations before disengaging. Phantom fighters countered by positioning themselves between the MiG bases at Phuc Yen and Kep and the bomber streams, engaging interceptors before they reached launch parameters. On the night of December 23rd, a pair of 4 seconds from the 555th Tactical Fighter Squadron intercepted 3 Mi-G, 21 seconds climbing toward a B-52 cell. The Phantoms fired radar-guided Sparrow missiles from 10 miles, downing one MiG and forcing the others to abort. The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. Fighter patrols required precise timing and fuel management. Aircraft had to arrive on station before the bombers, maintain patrol for the duration of the strike, and egress with enough fuel to reach a tanker or divert base. The margin for error was narrow, but the presence of fighters forced MiG pilots to fight through a screen before reaching the bombers, degrading their effectiveness and morale. By December 26th, Hanoi's air defense network showed unmistakable signs of collapse. SAM launch rates had dropped to fewer than 50 per night, and many sites fired single missiles rather than salvos, indicating depleted inventories. AAA remained active but less coordinated, with batteries firing barrage patterns rather than radar-directed bursts. MiG sorties declined as fuel shortages and airfield damage grounded aircraft. American intelligence intercepts revealed growing frustration among North Vietnamese commanders who reported inability to sustain defensive operations at previous intensity. The strategic effect became visible in reconnaissance imagery. Rail yards stood cratered and idle, petroleum storage facilities burned, and communication nodes lay in ruins. The North's ability to support military operations in the South depended on these nodes. Their destruction severed the logistical arteries that sustained the war effort. The final nights of Linebacker II saw the bomber streams penetrate Hanoi's airspace with reduced but still present resistance. On December 27th, a wave of 15 B-52 seconds struck the Lang Dang rail yard and the Hanoi International Radio Facility, encountering sporadic SAM launches along the primary ingress route. defenses had been pushed to the periphery, unable to contest the core target area with the intensity of the opening nights. Crews reported fewer radar locks and diminished jamming requirements compared to the first week. Yet the threat had not vanished entirely. 2 missiles were fired from a previously silent site near Bach Mai, forcing one cell to execute evasive maneuvers that scattered their bomb pattern. The psychological impact on North Vietnamese leadership was profound. The realization that their capital could no longer be effectively defended against sustained bombardment, that Soviet-supplied systems had been degraded beyond rapid reconstitution, and that continued resistance would invite further destruction without altering the strategic outcome. The cost-benefit calculus shifted. Prolonging the stalemate risked additional infrastructure losses for uncertain gain. On December 28th, Hanoi signaled willingness to resume negotiations without preconditions. The message reached Washington through intermediaries in Paris, and Nixon ordered a halt to Linebacker II operations above the 20th parallel. Over 11 nights, B-52 seconds had flown over 700 sorties, according to U.S. military records, delivering an estimated 15,000 tons of ordnance against 34 target complexes. 15 bombers were lost to SAMs and operational accidents, with 93 aircrew killed, captured, or missing. North Vietnamese losses, as assessed by post-war intelligence reports, included approximately 1,600 military personnel, extensive damage to transportation and communication infrastructure, and depletion of SAM inventories to levels that precluded sustained air defense operations. The immediate tactical result was clear. Hanoi could no longer defend its airspace or sustain the logistical network required to prosecute the war in the South at previous levels. The Paris Peace Accords were signed on January 27, 1973, less than a month after Linebacker II concluded. The agreement provided for a ceasefire, withdrawal of remaining American forces, and return of prisoners of war. Whether the accords represented a genuine resolution or merely a face-saving pause remains debated, but the operational lessons of Linebacker II were unambiguous. Concentrated air power, applied with adaptive tactics and sustained tempo, could degrade sophisticated air defenses and create conditions that shifted political calculations. The campaign validated the integration of suppression missions, electronic warfare, and radar-guided bombing into a coherent operational system. It also exposed vulnerabilities. Predictable tactics invited attrition, logistical constraints limited campaign duration, and even successful operations required constant adaptation to enemy countermeasures. Future air campaigns would incorporate these lessons, emphasizing flexibility, rapid retargeting, and suppression of enemy air defenses as prerequisites for strategic bombing. The legacy of Linebacker II extended beyond Vietnam. The tactics developed over those 11 nights, compressed time over target windows, multi-axis attacks, aggressive suppression, and chaff corridors, became doctrinal foundations for later conflicts. The campaign demonstrated that industrial-scale bombing retained relevance in an era of guided missiles and electronic warfare, provided it was executed with disciplined coordination and supported by a layered offensive package. For the crews who flew the missions, the experience was a crucible, navigating through SAM-filled skies, trusting in jamming and formation discipline, and delivering ordnance with the knowledge that each sortie contributed to bringing the war closer to conclusion. Hanoi's standoff ended not because of ground combat or diplomatic maneuvering alone, but because 11 nights of relentless air assault demonstrated that the cost of continued resistance exceeded any conceivable benefit. The B-52, a platform designed for nuclear deterrence, had found a new role as an instrument of strategic pressure in a limited war, proving that air power, when applied with persistence and adapted to the enemy's response, could create the conditions necessary for a negotiated settlement. Stories like this remind us that war isn't just about dates and numbers. It's about people, the split-second decisions that shaped entire battles. Every flight, every firefight, every tactic is a piece of a massive puzzle, where one order could decide the fate of hundreds. We bring back these forgotten moments to show that behind every report and archive page stood real men, pilots, scouts, engineers, soldiers, whose courage and ingenuity changed the course of war, even if their names were never written in textbooks. Tell us in the comments, what moment of the Vietnam War impressed you the most? Or what operation should we cover next? Your ideas keep these stories alive. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe. It helps us uncover more forgotten chapters where history lives through those who fought it.